Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new here, my name is Miranda and I am the Enchantress of Avalon. For today's Fairy Friday video, I decided I would be discussing the topic of Celtic sovereignty. And it ties in very nicely to all of the other fairy related content and Celtic related content and also Arthurian content here on my channel. So, sovereignty in the Celtic lands was a concept that's often associated and intimately linked with the divine feminine, in that most sovereign figures are goddesses, and the sovereignty figures within Celtic lore and then later within the Arthurian pantheon of lore are these fairy goddess women who bestow sovereignty on a king. So, figures like the Lady of the Lake in the Arthurian legends, handing the sword of Excalibur to Arthur, that is a sovereignty aspect. That is a sovereignty action to actually give him the sword that is his right to rule. Because there are different things. The Sword in the Stone was a different thing altogether in earlier versions of the lore. And Excalibur, whether it was the Sword of the Stone or not, was still in control by the Lady of the Lake herself. So we still have that female sovereignty goddess figure who is bestowing this sort of power in some way, shape, or form, whether she puts it in a stone or not. And we have figures like Morgan Le Fay, who primarily works to test knights throughout the legends. Yes, is she plotting the downfall of Camelot and her brother in the legends? Of course she is, but she's also testing knights, and we see this in the stories like of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. We see this in her Val Saint Retour, where she tests the loyalty of knights in love, and those that don't pass these tests are trapped within this valley. We have other sovereign figures like Guinevere herself. What cemented Arthur's right to rule? His marriage to Guinevere. Yes, Excalibur said that he was, meant to be king, and he had acted as such, but he would never have been able to keep his crown if it wasn't for that cementing marriage. And we see this all through Celtic lore of a marriage cementing a king's right to rule. We see this with Blodeuwedd. Lou's right to actually rule and to be fully empowered only happened through his marriage. In fact, Blodeuwedd is literally made from flowers in order to marry him, because Math and Gideon knew Lou wouldn't be at his full power if he wasn't married. And we see this with Rhiannon. Both of her husbands gain rights to rule through their union with her. Yes, her first husband, Poole, had already proved himself with Araun, the lord of Annwn, and a fairy king in his own right and a fairy god in his own right. But what really cemented Poole's right to rule his own kingdom was his marriage to Rhiannon. Wrong tale. His marriage to Rhiannon cemented his right to rule. And the birth of their son further cemented their marriage as a valid one. So we have all of these aspects of this feminine force cementing the right to rule for the men. And it's derived from real Celtic customs. And what I mean by that is, in Celtic lands, we know that they had what is called matrilineal descent. Matrilineal descent means that instead of a crown being passed from a king to his own son, a crown would pass from a king to usually his nephew. His nephew, that was his sister's son, because it's all going through the mother line, matrilineal descent. So you have, yes, men are ruling, but women have the power of begetting the men who rule. It is also noteworthy that we have powerful female sovereignty figures who nurture knights and heroes in different tales. We have the stories of the Lady of the Lake fostering an orphan's Lancelot in Avalon, making him both otherworldly and mundane, that is, of the human world. He's both. He was born of the human world, but he was raised in Avalon, and he was nurtured by a female sovereignty figure. And we do have tales throughout all of Celtic lore of these female sovereignty and warrior figures nurturing male heroes. In Ireland, Cuchulain's legends and myths have him nurtured by female sovereign and goddess-like figures who are then going to bring him up to become the hero that he is. And it's an interesting take on warrior mythos. In other cultures in the ancient world, you see it more that this warrior nature, this knightly virtue nature, whatever you want to call it, is being nurtured from passing from men to men. Certainly in ancient Greece, we see this. In ancient Rome, we see this. But in the Celtic lands, although it's the men that are doing the actual fighting primarily in these stories, not to say there aren't female warriors, but the ones on the battlefields are primarily men. It's the women who are nurturing this in them, though. And it's this really interesting balance of that divine masculine with the divine feminine. The divine feminine is nurturing the truly divine masculine. And the divine feminine is cementing a right to rule. And maybe that's why we have so many more tales of fairy queens than of fairy kings when we're just looking at fairy lore in general. We do have fairy kings, of course, but their prominence has always been for the fairy queens, the very many of them. Fairy queens are the ones that are known to intermarry with humans and beget mortal fairy hybrid bloodlines. It's more so than the fairy kings. It's the fairy queens that are known to sometimes rule completely by themselves. Not to say there aren't some circumstances of fairy kings doing this, but we see this much more so with the fairy queens. And I would hazard a guess that that could be a link to this sovereignty aspect. Of course, fairies exist in all cultures, but there's a huge amount of them in Celtic lore and legend. And I think that this all interconnects to this idea of sovereignty being feminine. The female sovereignty figures that nurture male heroes, male knights, male monarchs in order for them to truly rule, because women are the lands. Earth is almost always seen as feminine. I can't think of an example where Earth is masculine, because we have this concept of the Earth Mother, which means the land itself is feminine. And we have all of these references across all cultures of the land being seen as a woman, this nurturing mother, this fertile woman bearing the fruits so that we can reap them and be provided for. It's why fertility goddesses are often connected to the earth and to the crops, etc., etc. That's what I really think it is, because at the end of the day, king marrying a sovereignty figure, a fairy woman who's a sovereignty figure, in the case of like Arthur and Guinevere, is marrying the land itself. Poole married the land when he married Rhiannon, and that's what cemented his right to rule. And in the case of Lugh, he literally married a woman made of flowers of that land when he married Blodeuwedd. This is what cements the right to rule and the right of Celtic kingship. It's a very interesting thing that could be tied together all through Celtic culture. And maybe Celtic culture was more equal than people might think. I don't know. It's my analysis that it could be a little more equal than we might think. Do I think that the Celtic culture was a complete matriarchy at one point? Probably not. I think we have this desire to see that maybe there was a completely matriarchal history that predates the patriarchy. But maybe that matriarchy was just a more equal society. And maybe what we see in Celtic sovereignty goddesses is the ideals of this continuing onward, where it's not men are less than women or women are better than men. It's that men and women are of equal worth, but they have different things that make them valuable. Different, but very much so equal. And you need both the divine masculine and the divine feminine to balance each other out to truly have the power of the land. And that is what I wanted to talk about today with the Celtic concept of sovereignty. I do hope you liked this video, and if you do, please like, comment, subscribe, and check out my blog, whiteroseofAvalon.life. And I will link some of my blog posts in the description box below. And my Discord server link will also be in there, as it always is, if you'd like to join in the discussion a little bit more over on my Discord server. And I want to end this by saying happy Friday the 13th, everyone. And a little bit of a reminder that Friday the 13th is not a day of negative energy. It originally was meant to be a day of positive energy and truly a divine feminine day. Just like there are 13 moons in a calendar year, 13 is a sacred feminine number, and it was taken on to have negative connotations when the church tried to wipe out pagan religions, unfortunately. So remember today as a truly powerful divine day, which is also why I thought Celtic sovereignty figures, who are predominantly female, was the perfect subject for this video. Happy Friday the 13th, and have a very blessed Fairy Friday. Bye now.